Someone once told me the grass is much greener on the other side. When I paid a visit, while it's possible I missed it, it seemed different yet exactly the same. Till further notice, I'm in between, from where I'm standing, my grass is green. Someone once told me the grass is much greener on the other side.
Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm discussing one of the best episodes of the wonderful Nicktoon as told by Ginger, And She Was Gone, written by series creator Emily Kapnek and directed by Mark Risley. Emily Kapnek also created Suburgatory, which starred Jane Levy, aka Zoe, from Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist. She also created Selfie, which I discussed way back in episode 26 of this podcast. I'm still salty that that show was canceled after only one season. I'll never get over that. It was such a great show. Great characters, great premise, had the heart and humor to it. It was a modern take on Pygmalion. I had a lot of fun revisiting that show, so go back and give that one a listen if you're interested. And she also created Splitting Up Together, which co-starred Jenna Fisher, aka Pam Beasley from The Office. So she's a phenomenal writer, Emily Kapnek. This episode is loosely based on her own life when she was younger, when she had written something and then her teacher thought she was depressed. And this show truly is such a gem, the way it tackles such heavy topics, but also just everyday things that kids and adolescents go through. And this episode was nominated for an Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program, less than 1 hour. It should have won. It should have won. But this show premiered way back in 2000. I say way back, it's been 21 years now, but I was 9 when this show premiered, so I was a little young. But what drew me in as a kid watching it, that made it stand out as a kid watching it to me, was number one, this has been mentioned about this show, but how the characters change their clothes, in particular Ginger and her friends. That was a unique thing because 99% of cartoon characters have the same outfits, and the reason for that is budgetary reasons, that it costs more money to do a whole new character model. Also, it had continuity, and also, I guess you could say the artwork makes it stand out too, but really what makes it stand out is how realistic it feels. That really this could have been a live-action series, but it just works so well in animation, obviously, because the way it handles, especially in this episode, handles things that are not always explored in children's media in general. I mentioned that a little bit when I discussed The Wild Thornberrys earlier this year, how I think that's all the more important to have with shows like this in particular, slice of life shows. If you look at, say, of course, Hey Arnold, another huge Nicktoon, one of the best Nicktoons, another slice of life series, how that show wonderfully tackled heavy topics at times. And in particular with this show, about growing up and becoming a teenager. And so it just does it all so well. So this episode is a top 3 in my opinion. It's amazing. And rewatching it, I got emotional. Wow. I remember watching it as a kid though, and in particular wanting Ginger's keyboard, her typewriter rather. I was just jealous. I was like, oh, it would be so amazing to type on a real typewriter. I remember thinking that. But, oh my goodness. So, my nostalgia in particular for this series are really the early episodes. In particular, Carl and Maude, and the Sleep On It episode. And even with this show, a unique thing about it too that stands out, with Lois Foutley being a divorced mother, a single mother for most of the show until then she gets married to Dr. Dave, which is so wonderful too. And this show, sadly though, when it moved to Nicktoons, the Nicktoons network, and then it just, for years, they didn't air the last few episodes. That's just truly a shame because it's just such a wonderful show. Thankfully, all 60 episodes are now available to watch on Paramount Plus. And before I go any further, I want to give a shout out to, if you're a huge fan of this show and you haven't listened to the We're in Between podcast, it is an absolute must listen, co-hosted by Patricia Miranda of Old School Lane and Casey and Ashley of the Friday Night Nicktoons podcast. They went through every single episode of As Told by Ginger, recapping each episode, sharing their thoughts on each episode. They also had on many guests. They interviewed voice actors, directors, artists. They interviewed Emily Kapnek herself. And Patricia also hosted a truly wonderful 20th anniversary live stream last October to celebrate the 20th anniversary of As Told by Ginger. So she reunited, again, a lot of the cast and crew of the show. So big shout out to Patricia. She, of course, has been on this podcast too a couple of times. She and I both had Ginger Fowley as our number 3 in our top 5 favorite animated protagonists. And thank you also, Patricia, for retweeting my poll last month, where I put out this poll asking which As Told by Ginger episode you would like to hear me discuss. And so, getting into the episode itself now. So, it opens with Ginger and her classmates and their teacher, Miss Zorsky, talking about a writing competition. And I just love the image of Ginger raising her hand so eagerly that she's holding her arm with her other hand. I remember as kids in the classroom when you're holding your hand up for a while, then your arm starts to get tired, and like you're holding, I remember doing that myself. I remember my classmates doing that from time to time. So it's just a cute image that just kind of brought a smile to my face, because I just immediately recalled that. And with Ginger, how she's so excited about this writing contest, and we see that moment of Miss Zorsky when Ginger takes the paper to learn about the contest, and then Miss Zorsky says, how would I know? Just kind of that little nod of encouragement, honestly, which I find so adorable. And that too reminded me of a couple of teachers for me in elementary school and actually in high school who knew how much I wanted to be a writer and really encouraged me. And that really meant a lot to me, because that's so important, having that encouragement, having a mentor of any sort, but someone who believes in you like that is just really all the more valuable. It's important to believe in yourself, of course, but having someone else too, that just really is truly a wonderful, valuable thing. So that scene when, well, it's funny too, first when they're talking about it, Ginger and her friends Dodie and Macy. It's universally agreed that Dodie is not a good friend to Ginger. I don't want to go on a whole tangent about Dodie, but she's funny in this. She's like, oh, maybe you should write about me. Like, okay, Dodie. And Macy's such a great character, though. One episode I didn't include on the list in the poll was Come Back Little Seal Girl, another great episode. But, you only have 4 options, so I picked just 4 of my favorites, but that's another one of my favorites. I also really love the Even Steven holiday special, but Macy's just such a great character. I know the voice actors have talked about this too, in particular Aspen Vincent, who voices Dodie. She talked about this on the We're in Between podcast, how Dodie is the person who so much cares about what other people think, whereas Macy doesn't care at all what other people think, so you have both of those on the opposite ends, and then Ginger's kind of in the middle. She's in between, so to speak. That reminds me too, the theme song, I'm in Between, by Macy Gray. Such a great theme song for this show. But, Ginger then, when she goes home and she's at her keyboard, she puts on the tea kettle, talk to me, I'm listening. I love that whole scene. That whole animation sequence is absolutely beautiful. When she's typing out her poem. And it's just great too when she says how, thanks guys, but I'm just going to do what I usually do, just clear my mind and just see where it leads me. It's just really great seeing her creativity come to life with that whole animation sequence with the marionette. And the poem obviously is so beautiful. I love that whole scene. It's just fantastic.
Talk to me. I'm listening. She chose to walk alone, though others wondered why. Refused to look before her, kept eyes cast upwards, towards the sky. She didn't have companions, no need for earthly things, only wanted freedom from what she felt were puppet strings. She longed to be a bird, that she might fly away, She pitied every blade of grass, for planted they would stay. She longed to be a flame that brightly danced alone, felt jealous of the steam that made the air its only home. Well, what do you think so far? And you can be honest.
I think you might want to be careful about who you let catch you talking to major household appliances. But don't worry, your secret's safe with us. Ain't that right, Cooley?
The little joke from Lois afterward is just so great too. Isn't that right, Cooley? It's just great. Lois, obviously, too, a truly phenomenal character. More than just a mom to Ginger and Carl. Obviously, we see her growth throughout the series, too. Seeing her as a nurse, like seeing other aspects of her character outside of just being a mom. That said, though, being an amazing mom to Ginger and Carl, knowing that Ginger can talk to her about anything, that she's a true confidant, that she speaks to Ginger not just as her mother, but also just person to person, woman to woman, you know, that she can relate to her and help her out. And yes, she is sometimes a strict mother too, which that's fair too, like when she gets angry at Ginger, when she goes behind her back and they do the fake up, you know, that classic episode, or when she doesn't want Ginger to shave her legs, saying there will be plenty of time for that, but right now you're still growing, you're still a kid. So, you know, it's just all these great layers to Lois. And really, I've mentioned this, I believe when Patricia was on the podcast, when we were talking about It's Told by Ginger, I mentioned that one of my favorite moments in the entire series from Hello Stranger, another one of my favorite episodes. The ending of that episode, when Ginger reads her poem, she's looking out in the crowd for her dad. He doesn't show up. She gets flowers afterwards, sunflowers, from her dad, supposedly. And then when Lois is in the hospital recovering from the whole thing with the powdered snake thing with Carl, that whole nonsense. And then Ginger says, "Hey, Mom, thanks for the flowers." That gets me every time. It's utterly beautiful. So I love that so much. And it's sad in a way that Ginger's so excited about her poem, but then it's rightful that Ms. Zorsky is concerned. I can see her point of view, of course. But poor Ginger just being so excited, then you don't like it? It's like, no, Ginger, that's not it at all. I'm just a little concerned. It's a little troubling. But with Ginger, she's just adamant that it's just fiction and I'm not depressed. So with Mussorgsky, though, thinking that maybe she should see the school psychologist just to run it by her, and because she's worried that does Ginger want to disappear like the girl in the story in her poem. And it's interesting then with Ginger how like no one understands her in this sense. Everyone's just kind of like, oh no, Ginger, like, are you okay? Even Miranda, when she says, oh, I didn't know if you were clinically depressed. Like, I always wish you would disappear, but I didn't know you wanted that too. Like, okay, Miranda. I like Miranda, though, I'll be honest. She's a great character, even though a lot of her interactions in general with Ginger, obviously being an adversary with Ginger throughout the whole show, really, like a main antagonist, that it stems from jealousy, because she's jealous of her best friend Courtney Gripling's interest in Ginger, which we see in the very first episode with Courtney looking in her compact mirror at Ginger and her friends. And Courtney is a great character too. In this episode in particular, she's a little cringy, to say the least, with her whole melodramatic thing about wanting to be seen too, wanting attention. It's like, oh, you didn't think you could have all the attention, did you? And she's dressed in black and she's crying. And then when they're in group therapy and the psychologist says, Courtney, do you think we could talk about something else, like your perpetual need for attention? Like, poor Courtney. Oh, goodness. But she's a great character, though. And how she just always is in fascination with Ginger. So it's a really interesting dynamic there. Because for the most part, though, she does genuinely take an interest in Ginger and just genuinely wants to understand and befriend Ginger. But there are times where she's, you know, a little catty. But that's why she's interesting too, though. Whereas Miranda is just totally catty. I love the lines, not in this episode, when she says, "Let me pretend I care." Okay, I'm done. That's just such a great line from Miranda, voiced by Cree Summer. So, too funny. And Ginger, of course, voiced by Melissa Disney. So, with Ginger, though, again, it's just great then when she slips the poem under her, like, under the door for her mom to read. That whole scene is so beautiful with her mom. She's saying, I know you don't want to talk about, but I read your poem and it was really great, kiddo. I'm really proud of you. Way to go. And then she says, oh, but Mom, don't you think it's troubling? And aren't you worried I'm depressed? And then she says, no, you're just very insightful, and you know how to be in touch with your own feelings and other people's feelings. That's why you can write them so beautifully. And she says, no matter what anyone says, no one knows you better than you know yourself. So again, just talking to her heart to heart, so beautiful. And Ginger saying, thank you, Mom. You always know exactly what to say to make me feel better. You make me feel, thanks for making me feel normal. And it's just so funny afterwards when that scene is the button of that scene with Carl and Hoodsy running out of their little doghouse lair thing, and then Carl saying, must get the potion, like must trade the eyeball. And the whole subplot with Carl and Hoodsy with the vanishing potion with Noel Sussman, it's a fantastic B story. I really like Carl a lot. He's one of my favorite characters too in this show, because though he is a mischievous kid with his best friend Hoodsy, voiced by Tress MacNeille, he is a really, deep down, honestly, he has a really good heart. He looks out for Ginger. He looks out for his mom, Lola, as he calls her from time to time, if I recall correctly, which is cute. He's kind of the man of the house, in a sense, since it's just, the three of them for the majority of the show. But him and his crazy schemes with Hoodsy, you got to admire it in a way, that they're kind of these little entrepreneurs. I think he's going to grow up to be a big success somehow, him and Hoodsy. Maybe they're going to sell something or create some crazy thing, or, have some interesting business venture. And the dynamic with them and Brandon is fantastic, voiced by Grey Delisle Griffin. He's a great character. That thing with that episode with like the monkey, his pet monkey, Mr. Licorice, is great. Also, Blake Gripling, voiced by Kath Soucie. That dynamic is great. The whole thing with the petrified eyeball, which is an ongoing thing. And like when they're fascinated with all of these gross things, like with the garbage man, when they're interested in that and they find Blake's blankie, that's a great one. And like I said, Carl and Maude, that's a favorite episode of mine too, when he just falls for this elderly woman. It's too funny. And this episode's just so great with Noel Sussman, voiced by the creator of the series, Emily Kapnek. How she's just this oddball girl, but Carl just becomes smitten with her then when they buy the vanishing potion, though. And then they're looking through the pictures of who they're going to make disappear. And it's like, I'm talking about, really, they got to be expendable. And then when Hoodsy shows him the photo, it's like, I'm talking Noel Sussman. Who? So it's so funny. And then immediately when he puts the vanishing potion around, and then he's just like fascinated by her all of a sudden when she's got her little finger puppets. It's like, wow, she's really funny, Carl. And then when she's eating her food in the cafeteria, it's like she made like a flying saucer UFO thing with it. It's just like really interesting. And then he's like, oh no, she's really weird. Like, it's too cute. Oh my goodness. And it's one of those great things. It reminded me a little bit of Rugrats, where like one of those, this line so perfectly with like the kid logic, and then like when she's gone the next day, thinking, oh, he really did make her vanish. And then he's just like so distraught with himself, like, oh no, because Noel Sussman is anything but expendable. She could be like my soulmate, Hoods. Like, oh goodness. Hoodsy and Carl have such a great friendship. I also love the episode when they play the Glockenspiel, because I played the Glockenspiel in elementary school. I proudly played the Glockenspiel in elementary and middle school. It's the bells. That's the layman's term for it, but the technical term is the Glockenspiel, so that made me happy seeing it on this show. I remember that. But anyway, so then when he's like, that's where he sells the petrified eyeball to get the reversal potion. Because even in the beginning of the episode when he says, like, oh, I see that it doesn't come with the reversal, and that's a little, like the reversal potion, that's a little irresponsible, don't you think? So, good on Carl. He does have a good head on his shoulders, despite all the mischief he gets into with Hoodsy, but he is a great kid. And so it's just so funny then when, like, thinks she's gone, and it's great how it coincides with Ginger, with the A story. And evidently this episode was actually originally titled And Then She Was Gone, but then they had to change it because that's also a book title, apparently. But then when Mrs. Gordon just says, what are you talking about? She was transferred to another school, so there you go. And that just reminds me too of that episode when she passes away because the voice actor had passed away. So touching and handled so beautifully again. And also, that's just randomly reminded me, I want to also mention the character of Darren Patterson, another wonderful character who unfortunately isn't in this episode at all. But I love the blossoming romance, really, between him and Ginger, when she first thinks she has a crush on him, but then realizes, and he's like, oh, like, you're my best friend and everything, but, like, I think of you as a sister. But then when he does end up developing feelings for her, in another favorite episode of mine, Foutley's on Ice, aka Far From Home, I like that episode because, in particular, one of my favorite scenes, again, in the entire show, is the scene when Noelle, Carl, and Hoodsy, like, standing, like, many feet apart from each other, and then, like, screaming, it's like, yeah, no, Carl, you misunderstood, like, when Carl thinks Hoodsy likes Noelle, that whole thing, like, it's a love triangle. I like that scene a lot, but I also like that episode because that's when Darren realizes his feelings for Ginger, and then when the two of them kiss, and then they start to date, and then, as we know, how it pans out, but then with the ending too of this series, we know how it all works out, so that's a really wonderful relationship too. But anyway, so then the ending of this episode with Carl when he goes to Noelle, and then she's reading from the book that he was interested in with the penguins, and so cute, and she's like, hello, Carl, and then when she gives him the book, and then he says, where have you been all my life? It's just very adorable. It's so cute. So that's very sweet. I love that whole thing. It's so cute. And also the ending is so wonderful too. When Ginger's reflecting, writing in her diary. It's so cute how she does that too. I forgot she's a lefty too. So, kind of like Doug from the series Doug, another great Nicktoon. Because he's a lefty also, and he'd be like, dear journal. I love that too. Anyway, so when she's writing in her diary and reflecting on, maybe us writers, we do put a little of ourselves on the page. And I like what I saw. Like, I saw a little of myself, and, so it's really cute because we do sometimes have those feelings of, regarding the poem itself, when she talks about how, well, like when the psychiatrist asks her, do you sometimes wish you could disappear? And she says, does right now count? So, just things like that. And again, it's just truly a beautiful poem. And that whole sequence, too, with the marionette walking, and then the door opens and the marionette vanishes, and then printing the book of And She Was Gone by Ginger Foutley. And we know again how the series ends when she's reading from her book as told by Ginger. It's beautiful. So Ginger truly is just such a wonderful protagonist, has a good head on her shoulders, just a relatable character. She's just so great. That episode too, the A ticket, is a great one, as I'm recalling other moments that I love in this show. It's great because, like, she's a science whiz and the guy is trying to just cozy up to her so he'll get an A. And so, like, it's nice seeing all these different layers to Ginger. Later on in the series, when she dates that guy, Orion, her thoughts on romance and relationships, and because then, like, with the whole falling out with Darren, but then thankfully it works out, but so she's just such a great character, and I admire her a lot. I love also the episode when when Macy turns 13 and she wants to relive her youth because she never really got any birthdays with the parents then. And obviously Comeback Little Seal Girl is so beautiful too, when the music cuts out and then Dodie and Ginger are going to pull the curtain, but then when she starts singing and everyone applauds her and it's just like, go Macy. And that episode ends so cutely too. It's like, how come we never hug Miranda? It's like, let's give it a try. Like Courtney hugging Miranda. Too great. Miranda too is interesting because she's rarely vulnerable, but she is vulnerable in the Summer of Camp Caprice episode, one of the TV movies in this show. Foutley's on Ice is another one, aka Far From Home, but the Summer of Camp Caprice, aka Season of Caprice, when she is crying when she's upset with, like, missing Courtney and everything, and when she kind of bonds with Darren a little bit, that's interesting. And then in season 2 when he gets his headgear off and then they date for a hot second, that's funny too. But that's a nice friendship too, actually. But so it's nice seeing those other layers to her as well. And Dodie too, she does have her moments. Like, I like the episode with when the grandmother dies, and then Hoodsy kind of has mixed feelings because he wasn't really close with their grandma, but then, Dodie recalling about Nana Bishop. And as I mentioned, I love the Even Steven episode with Ginger bonding with her dad, whereas Carl has more of a strained relationship with him, saying, oh, I'd get in the car, but I don't get in the car with strangers, things like that. I love also Butterflies Are Free, a truly wonderful episode when they graduate from middle school, and then she gives the analogy about butterflies spreading our wings onto our next adventure in life, onto high school. And that's such a touching, beautiful episode. And then with her father giving her that analogy about, like, you gotta let them go with the butterflies and see where it takes you. And then, like, letting the butterflies free. It's beautiful, that episode, the imagery in it and the message of it. So again, all these beautiful things in this series, it's just truly wonderful. All of the coming of age things about growing up. And it's just such a wonderful show. So props to Emily Kapnek and everyone who worked on this series. Such a great show. I may have to revisit it and talk about another episode sometime because it's just truly such a wonderful show. And with that, that is going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. Be sure to visit storytellingsaga.com, and as always, feel free to send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by emailing me at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next episode is the 150th episode of Storytelling Saga, and to celebrate, I am going to be discussing my all-time favorite anime, Fruits Basket. It's going to be a lot of fun. I got clips I'm going to be sharing. I may be performing. That's a first on this podcast. I have a lot of memories to share about this anime and the manga. I love the characters so much. It truly holds such a special place in my heart, that series. So stay tuned. It's going to be a lot of fun. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.